Hi, everyone, and this is the seventh episode of Weldon Witness, Bookworm, Film Geek, and Friend. But for you, it might be the second, if not the first, because this is the first one, if I'm doing the math correctly, since the strike ended. But I've been doing 5 episodes without it, and well, I'm very happy to be back. I hope that you all are happy to be back. I wanted to start us off by discussing how I felt about this entire strike, what it took for me to get through it. I mean, I might be painting the strike in a bad light, but it did give me a lot of things that I could do. Like, I got the 5th book of my series published. I was able to be with my Aunt Meg for a reasonable amount of time, and I also have an announcement. I'll do it a little bit later, but let me just say that that 5 weeks off, it can really make you lazy. I kept telling everyone that I felt like Garfield throughout most of the strike. You know, lying in bed, just either watching TV or eating something deep fried, and it wasn't really that enjoyable. But it was a little bit at first, but yeah, so I wanted to do something to get a little bit back into the mood because I was in anticipation when I heard this strike might have been coming to a close. I mean, by the start of the 5th week, I was expecting it to have already been done. Let me tell you a small story. I have a dad who went to Trent University. It might have been his high school, not the university, that was on strike, but when he was, there was a strike and it happened for 6 weeks. And I expected the strike that we had to go on for maybe just 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe even shorter than 1 week, and I never expected it to get as long as it did. So I was worried that all my teachers would have expected me to have done all my work, because 5 weeks off is a lot of time. I knew they weren't, and I was being told that everyone was in the same chair as me. Everyone else was lazy and everyone else was in anticipation. It did make me slightly comforted, but I felt like I had literally, and I quote, lost my mojo a little bit. So I wanted to. So on November 6th, my book came in the mail. It was 585 pages, and a thought occurred to me, and I wasn't sure if I was going to follow up. And you see, I published the first book of the Blacktop Brothers when I was 13 years old, and I wrote it when I was 11, and it's 143 pages long. And I was pretty proud of it, and then I wasn't. I felt like I could have done better with it when I saw it in print. And these past few years, as I published more and more books in the series, I felt like it could have started off a bit better. And you know, I've self-published all of these books, and I've been so worried about my future, and I've been wanting to become a best-selling author, and I feel like a good start would have been to finish this series so that my foot could be in the door. And I still feel that way, but I feel like the first book would be what they first look at. And honestly, I might be painting my own book in a bad light, but I still think that The Blacktop Brothers is a great book. And I have a lot of friends who say they love it too. In fact, I have a friend from high school who finished it in less than a school day and handed it back to me with a big thank you card. But I feel like I want to do it a bit better, so I've decided to redo the first 2 books. They will have the same resolution as the original copy. It would be sort of like a kid's version of the Blacktop Brothers and an adult version, you know? And this one will be like maybe 100 or 120 pages longer. And I was able to use the strike to get started. I was able to get like 63 pages done ever since I started last week. I have a friend who's an author named Sarah Walker. She always says that when you start to write a book, you should start strong. You should start being in the best of mood and write as much as you can so that by the end of the day, you look at your work and think, this novel is possible. And that's what happened. So now I'm back in, and I do feel pumped up. I still feel a little worked up by some of the stuff that I've been given to work. I think everyone has, but yeah, that's how the strike's had went for me, and I hope that now that you're back at school, I hope you're comfortable. Yesterday felt like the first day of school all over again, anticipation and everything. So, for those who don't know, Weldon Witness, Bookworm, Film Geek, and Friend is basically me talking about book and movie genres, and I did a lot of others. Like I did romance books, I did humorous books, I did let me have a thought. Book series that were very easy to get into. And there will be plenty more, like fantasy and sci-fi. And for movies, I did a lot of that stuff too, including horror and animation. So this time, I'm going to be visiting some classic books. I usually have more books here than I would. I would normally be surrounded by them, like all the books were giving me a hug, but not this time. But the point is, I'll be doing classics today, and then for movies, I'm going to be discussing kid-themed movies. You might know some of these movies when you were a kid. So we're going to take a short music break, and I hope you'll be back. And thanks for listening for the first segment. Hi, and we're back. And for today, we're going to be talking about some classic books. And I usually read teens books, and so most of these books that actually only two of them are ones that I wasn't forced to read. Kind of embarrassing when you think about it, but school books can be underrated. And I don't really know what would transcend between a good classic book and a bad classic book. Some of these you would just have to be in an attitude, and some of these are a lot more different than you think, because there are sometimes I think of classic books and think of the exact same thing, primarily because none of them would have our current technology in them. But anyway, the first big one I'm going to be talking about is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Everyone's heard of this one. And, well, before I became a book critic in 2014, I read this book in grade 9 for class. I got my own copy for it, and for a while it was my favorite book. And I was a little surprised by that, just because I didn't get the suspense I expected from its title, but I still got a society that was horrific and yet heroic at the same time with Atticus Finch. Everyone knows Atticus Finch. In fact, I heard that he was voted as the biggest hero in literature or in cinema, topping Spider-Man and all of the big legendary heroes for his help towards someone who was judged based on his color in a world that I think was at the time of Bonnie and Clyde, when it was incredulous and ridiculous to stand up for these people. But I'm so happy that we've gotten a little bit farther. I don't know. Sometimes we still feel like this horror is still around us. But To Kill a Mockingbird also has a touching innocence and shows how smart children are and how adventurous you might be. You might have had a strange neighbor or someone strange living on your neighborhood, and at the end of this book, when Scout is finally able to be face to face with Boo Radley, and when she said that she never gave Boo Radley anything back for saving their life from the notorious Bob Ewell, it made her sad, and it made me sad too. And just To Kill a Mockingbird is basically just a pretty powerful history book, and pretty unforgettable, and if you like it, then I hope you get the same gist as me. But here's a book that I've had for longer, and I have to admit is more exciting. Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Once again, another classic that everyone knows about. I've had this book since I was 10 years old, and I almost didn't read it. I almost scrapped it because I had only read it when I was 17, and my mom tried to read me the first part of it, but the first chapter was way too long for me. At that time, I only basically read the Captain Underpants books, but I also almost scrapped it because I saw a YouTube video and accidentally came across the YouTuber telling me the end of Lord of the Flies, and he wasn't a fan of that ending, and neither was I. But I finally took a chance on it, and the ending that YouTuber talked about didn't actually happen. He must have read a different book. But wow, is this book tense? I almost couldn't believe it was written in the 50s. It's so scary, and for all its simplicity too, and it does feel like a society without rules, and and it doesn't seem so as far-fetched as some might think a fiction book is. Now, I'm opening up my laptop quickly just because I love the pig chant, and I need to just tell it to you, but I haven't memorized it. Kill the beast, cut its throat, spill its blood, do him in. If that doesn't get you pumped for whatever's about to happen next, I don't know what will. So To Kill a Mockingbird is for me a 4-star out of 4 book, and Lord of the Flies is a 3.5 out of 4 book. And yeah, and Piggy's also a very likable person in fiction too. So the next good example of a classic I would think of is Romeo and Juliet. And you might be thinking, this is the first play I've ever talked about, and I don't really review plays, or well, I've reviewed one which was a French play called L'Avare, but that's another story. And spoiler alert, I thought that play was terrible, but I'm not the biggest fan of Shakespeare plays. I don't know. I feel like schools overuse them for plays, and I feel like we can all just go to something different. And I think maybe I have a burden for that because in school, Shakespeare plays were just so complicated. We just read lines and we were like, okay, what? But in grade 11, after reading A Midsummer Night's Dream in grade 9 and what was it, Twelfth Night in grade 10, Romeo and Juliet was what we were going to read for grade 11, and it was the only play I'd ever heard of as a little kid. So despite the fact that I knew next to nothing about it, I went in and I paid attention to it this time. And the reason that I find it pretty good is, well, because it's kind of a personal matter. You see, I've been interested in acting, and my interest peaked in grade 11 when I started my movie and book blogging career. But and I figured everyone else was reading the play in an anemic way. What our assignment was for us to all be in class and pick characters, and then we would all have the book open and read it out loud. And I was picked to be Juliet for the scene, for her first balcony scene and her longing for there to be a forever night. And I decided to practice my acting skills and dramatized it a bit. And I got clapping applause after I finished reading it. Everyone said I made an amazing Juliet. And then once we finished up the play, I got to be Romeo in his last scene. I felt that really meant a lot to me. And at the end of the semester, we did our exams, and my English teacher gave us these pieces of paper on our desks with a compliment. And mine was, I've discovered an actor. So Romeo and Juliet does mean quite a lot to me. And I feel it's one of Shakespeare's better plays, despite the insta-love that I'm not in real favor of and can't really take seriously. I still found it, I found it historical for me. And now for some bad examples of classics. These are ones that I feel like you should avoid because these are the type of books that teachers will probably try to ram down your throat to show you that reading is fun, but they might not see it. They might not see your choice in entertainment between us. It's like if you like these books, great. Just let me see your birth certificate to see if you were born in the 18th century or not. Just kidding. I'm not that cruel. But the first book I'm going to be talking about is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Basically, all of these books that I'm talking about, you've probably heard of. But The Great Gatsby is one of my rare 0s out of 4. Oh, the only thing I really liked about it was the choice of the protagonist, Nick Carraway. Instead of the big billionaire Gatsby or the love interest Daisy being the narrator, which is usually what happens, it was just a man who was caught in the middle and who knew them personally, and that was pretty much his only affiliation. But this didn't feel like a party for me. Everything felt well over detailed or just blah. And around chapter 8, we were supposed to describe a character. My team had to pick Myrtle, and I knew next to nothing about her. This book took me quite a while to read, and this sort of book is short enough so that if it had a plot I liked, I could speed through it in maybe 2 hours, maybe even less. But yeah. yeah, The Great Gatsby I felt was just a mess that, and F. Scott Fitzgerald had passed away thinking of himself a failure. I'm sorry that he did, and I hope he wrote a book that I like better so that I won't consider him a failure. So next is Wild Geese by Martha Ostenso, and believe it or not, these two books are both from 1925, and both I read in grade 11. Kind of crazy, right? And admittedly, Wild Geese is much better than The Great Gatsby. It's a lot more compelling. It's basically about a family called the Gares. I think it comprised of Judith Gare. The Jude was her short name, which is actually a boy's name, or it's a gender-neutral name. Sorry, I was thinking of a cartoon where a boy's name was Jude. And Amelia and David, I think there was one other, and Caleb Gare. Caleb Gare is the unforgettable one. Right in the first chapter, he reads something in their local church and kind of butchers it in a way to show that maybe he's the proper dictator. And right away, I was pretty infuriated. And yeah, Caleb Gare is very much an antagonist. He cares more about his flaxseed and making money than his family ever would. In fact, he loves his flaxseed and flaxseed alone, like his dog or his own daughter. And like they always get the family up way too early, and they say that there's no hope for them. Caleb wants to force them to stay at the farm, and hence the title. Wild Geese is about this family trying to rebel, and it was a hit because at that time no one had ever heard of a female character as empowering and as stubborn and as willing and successful as Judith Gare. But you see, Caleb just got on my nerves so much, and that's the point. But the story also just focused on him so much, and the fact that this family was apparently trapped, which I didn't buy from the beginning. I felt like it waited way too long. I kept waiting for the Camp family to run away from him so we could get to the real story. And by the time I found out that was going to happen, it was from an event that would just got popped up out of nowhere. I felt like if a book is going to have a climax, it has to build on it, not just announce that there's a fair going on and they decide that's going to be their ticket out. And by the end, I just wanted so much more. And the end result was one I didn't like, even though the rest of my class seemed to like it, so I applaud them. And this one is the oldest book I'll be mentioning, Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. Believe it or not, there's a top 10 best Canadian pop artists. No, not pop artists. Canadian just artists. It's been a long time. It was from my high school. Glenn Gould, who's my grandfather's cousin, was number 2. But Margaret Atwood was number 1. And I recently read her book, The Handmaid's Tale. In grade 9, I read her book, The Handmaid's Tale. I was a bit disappointed with it by the end, but I found her writing was nice enough. And then I was given Alias Grace by my mom, who had given up on the book, so she decided to give it to me. Alias Grace is a book about a girl in the 19th century who really lived called Grace Marks, who was apparently sent to prison for the killing of a maid she worked with, as well as her boss, or one of her bosses. And I found it a bit obnoxious that the book starts off by talking about how Grace got captured via a poem, and I also found some of her decisions just kind of overly wonky, especially when Grace's mom ends up passing away on a boat, and she kind of has a feeling she will. I felt that was just so depressing. And Grace has a friend named Mary who is apparently killed because a doctor had whacked her a bit or did sort of activities that would be prohibitive and put you to jail and life. And Grace did nothing about that. But I kept being very curious on how Grace would get out of this situation. I think, enjoyed the transition between her in prison and her remembering what had happened. But But I also found it unrealistic that even after 15 years later, I know Grace didn't remember the details of how she got captured because she's interrogated to try to find out if she can be set free. I mean, if I was put in prison, then I would remember the details about it for the rest of my life, wouldn't you? Yet apparently Grace doesn't. She openly admits that she doesn't remember some details. But I was excited to find out how or if she would get out of jail, and so I kept on reading. And basically, this book was going to be entirely determined by the ending. I was going to grade it based on its ending. There was nothing else that I could do, and I'm not going to spoil what happens in it. But let's just say it's one of the biggest screw you endings I've ever read in my entire life, and so I really can't recommend Alias Grace. So those are the classics that I liked, and after a short break, we're going to be talking about some kid-themed movies, if you don't remember. And I hope that even though you're in college, you like it. Thanks, and you can always contact us on Twitter and Instagram at DCSI Riot Radio. All right, see you in a bit. Hi, and we're back. So for the final segment, if you have forgotten or you left, we're going to be talking about kids' movies. So for starters, if you're new to this show, then you'll know that, unless I'm doing something like classic books, which might not have a certain right way of doing them, then I will explain what I think from my 3.5 years of experience of being a movie and book blogger is how best to review it, how to make a good movie or book if you decide to be an author or filmmaker in the future in this genre. So what I think makes a good kids movie is, for starters, don't assume that the kids are less smarter than you. Like if you're writing something for 3-year-olds, then maybe you can ignore this rule. Like kids might not know how to do long division yet, but don't assume like they won't be able to understand what a mystery is. They won't be able to understand how some things could connect because I don't know, that seems to be something that everyone just doesn't like to have to watch. And also, show that you're having fun with what you're doing. Kids might have short attention spans. I have a bit of a short attention span too, but the point is, some movie critics are very tolerable of very slow scenes. Most kids won't be. They're gonna want to be excited. They're going to want to watch something that they feel is worth their time instead of whatever other cartoon they might have on their mind. As if you have fun with what you're doing, then that'll be easy. That will come like it's a hobby. And also have some rewatchable and notable scenes if you can. Like the best kids movies, in my opinion, are ones you can still enjoy as a grown-up. Like it is very hard to balance a movie that 8-year-olds and 16-year-olds and 50-year-olds would love the exact same way. And even some of the movies I'm recommending, I've seen from experience that 8-year-olds would like a little more than 19-year-olds like me. But if you have some very notable scenes in them, then you can rewatch those. You might not mind that the entire movie might not be as good as that scene. And you'll want to rewatch the entire movie with your family if some scenes are good enough. So and also it's safe to be cheesy. Sometimes cheesy means better and inventive. Like for instance, there's a cartoon I haven't seen called Camp Lake Bottom, and in the theme song, and I'm making this sound a bit more intense than it is. These 3 characters are thrown into a big lake by a giant lobster from a pot. And we see that they might be about to be eaten by a shark, but then a tentacle grabs them and throws them out of the water. And as they're thrown out of the water, they're smiling. It corresponds with the beat. I mean, as for a cartoon, cartoons are generally, you're allowed to be a bit violent. I mean, what is South Park and The Simpsons for anyway? But in this case, logically, these kids would be terrified. They'd want to evacuate as soon as possible. And yet these characters seem to be having a little bit of fun here, and you can be kind of cheesy with that, because because it wouldn't be as fun if these characters didn't smile when they were coming out of the lake. It looks, as we watch them, that like they're jumping out of a trampoline or something. So anyway, now on to the good examples. The first one I'm going to mention is a movie called Max Keeble's Big Move. It's one you've either heard of and cherished or have never heard of before. It was released way back in 2001, and I saw it maybe like when I was 8. And it's about someone named, Max Keeble, and it's his first day of junior high. He has a very overactive imagination and has a crush on a big girl named Jenna. But that is really not the point. He has all of these mean people just attacking him and just making his life not that tolerable. For instance, there's even an evil ice cream man. He and Max Keeble have some history, like. Basically, Max once found a cockroach in his snow cone. His mom called the health department. The ice cream man got mailed. The ice cream man's been trying to nail Max ever since. There's also a bully who's scared of an old frog cartoon named McGoogles. His name is Troy McGinty, kind of similar to my last name, McGinn. I've always felt a connection with that character in that way, but he is a bully. There's no reason shown for what he does. So there's also a money thief and a principal, and the principal is played by Larry Miller. You'd know him best as the father in 10 Things I Hate About You. But my point is, I think it's really the funniest movie ever. Maybe, I think I'd have to rewatch it with a big audience to tell, but Max Keeble's Big Move is a movie that I've memorized from top to bottom, and whenever I'm just bored with something or waiting for something, I might think of it in my head. The set designs for a school setting, they're colorful and creative, and the humor also, it's a kid's film, so there's not going to be anything offensive in it, really, and it can be hard to keep that funny. You might think principal putting a pencil up his nose with the camera still on as he's telling the students stuff. That might not seem funny, but the delivery is just perfect. The characters are laughing with smiles. We laugh with them too. And let's see. Admittedly, Max tries to get back at all of these bullies in the time that he's apparently moving, and some might be thinking, why doesn't Max just tell his parents? Because these bullies have no cases. If Max told on them, they'd be doomed. But we wouldn't have the best movie situated in school ever made. The next movie I'm going to be talking about is Big Fat Liar, and I didn't get this reference when I saw it when I was an 8-year-old. It's the name of the antagonist, Marty Wolf. Basically, it's about a boy named Jason Shepard who lies all the time to get by. Some people might find that familiar because sometimes lying can be easier, even though if you get caught, then you're doomed. But basically, he lies all the time to get by on assignments that he decides not to do. But when the truth catches up with him, he all of a sudden can't turn it in because he misplaced his assignment. And he's basically the boy who cried, Marty Wolf, because this big TV producer, Marty Wolf, ended up taking this paper by accident, admittedly, but he turns it into his next movie. And Jason's finally telling the truth. No one believes him. So he decides to go all the way to Los Angeles secretly on a weekend when he's in summer school to try to get Wolf to admit the truth. I think that this is a good message for kids, that if you make a mistake, and then you can do what it takes to clean it up. You can do could do whatever it takes to clean it up. And, it is very cutthroat Hollywood indeed. Marty Wolf says when he sees Jason the next time, or else what, you're going to shoot me with a spitball, you're going to give me a wedgie? Grow up, Shepard, this is Hollywood, baby. We got fish eating fish, dogs eating dogs. And so kind of like Max Keeble's Big Move, Jason sets out to do whatever it takes to get Wolf to admit the truth, including putting blue dye in his pool, sneaking into his house as he's in the pool, and finding the shampoo he always uses and putting something orange in it to change it into hair dye, and reschedules an appointment into a birthday party invitation that they got, sending Marty in as the clown. It is. It's basically just a lot of fun. This sounds very Home Alone-ish. Some people have said it's like Home Alone Goes Hollywood, but it's a very good-natured comedy, and well, anyone who's had a bad boss or a bad teacher can relate to the people who are being treated by Marty Wolf. Next, I'm going to be talking about, well, 4 movies all as one. The first 2 Scooby-Doo movies and the first 2 Smurfs movies. The things these have in common is they were all directed by Raja Gosnell, who I feel is a very underrated director. You see, it's harder than you think to make a cartoon adaptation. Like, or you might think it is hard, but basically, when you do a cartoon, then that can be pretty much the only way people see these characters. And to bring them into live action, then you have to give them the same sort of complexity and soul. You have to choose actors that look like them and can have the same voice, same attitude, and same likability. And Scooby-Doo is a very, very good example of this. Basically, Linda Cardellini plays Velma, and Matthew Lillard plays Shaggy. They from what I've seen, are the 2 most notable casting decisions. They look spot on, and they act spot on. They have the same souls, and also married couple Freddie Prinze Jr. and Sarah Michelle Gellar play Fred and Daphne. In my opinion, from what I've seen of the Scooby-Doo cartoons, they can be hard characters to replace, and so they did it pretty adequately as well. And also, in both of the Scooby-Doo movies, they have a mystery that feels spooky and silly at the same time. The first one involved some sort of ritual that had a part that said, "This is what we creatures say." Rowan Atkinson is in it. It takes place at an amusement park called Spooky Island. And it involves a bit of body switching as well. And admittedly, this movie does have some vulgar humor in it, but not too much. And in the second movie, it talks about all these costumes and creatures coming alive, and the press against them, and some sort of instruction manual on how to create your own organically produced composite predators. And as for the Smurfs, like Hank Azaria was spot on as Gargamel from what I've seen. I've never seen the Smurfs, but he did a very good committed performance. And also the Smurfs are amazing to look at. They're what the pause button on the DVDs were made for. Just they feel so right next to you, and each one is pretty likable in its own way. And I'm in the minority on this one, but I kind of enjoyed the idea of the Smurfs going into the real world or our world, basically. For the first one in New York City, and the second one for France, and I gave a B+ to the first movie and an A- to the second movie. The problems I had with the first movie was I felt the Smurfs were a little too intent on going back home. I felt like they got a bit too depressed for their own good after just a little while. And they left without any way of them returning. So the Smurfs 2 undid that, and I also loved its ability to. Katy Perry plays Smurfette in these films, and she's just magnificent. She cries when she really cries when she feels heartbroken, sad, scared, and then when she has to be a very tough girl, then she nails it too in every scene that she's in. It also shows the conflictions of how she was created by Gargamel, and there are plenty of scenes where she feels responsible for some mischief that happens throughout the film. And it also shows the promise of family, the importance of forgiveness, and the things that I think kids' films should have. The last good example I'm going to be talking about is a film called Aliens in the Attic, and I gave this one a B+, but it's number 3 in my top 5 funniest films I think I've ever seen. Admittedly, there are some scenes where we feel that there's no way the parents wouldn't have seen the aliens, and the aliens do look like how you would think they are, about this tall, about a foot tall if you're only listening to this, and green, and antenna, and big laser gadgets. But something I appreciated was not just that this cast of kids that have to try to stop this alien invasion are of all different ages, from teenagers to middle schoolers to a toddler, but also the fact that what was I going to say? That the dynamic is that the Pearsons, which is the family, are trying to keep this invasion a secret from their parents as they're on vacation at this lake house. But at the same time, that's an overused thing. Like, I'm in the minority when I get annoyed that Spider-Man wants to keep his identity a secret from everyone. I can understand it, but sometimes I think that that not having the reaction is just a waste of an opportunity. But in Aliens in the Attic, it explains to us why they can't tell their parents very specifically. It actually has to do with the weapons they have and what type they can do, and also. I haven't talked about the humor yet, but basically the slapstick primarily goes to the doofus of the group, or actually he's not of the group. He's basically a wacky guy named Ricky. Just everyone in the Pearson family except Ricky's girlfriend Bethany, played by Ashley Tisdale, finds distastes to him. In fact, come to think of it, maybe I shouldn't have said doofus. I don't. But basically, like, Ricky ends up having to do everything. In fact, there's a time where he's actually, spoilers, an alien zombie. He's under their control, and he's just unexplainably running. He runs into a swing and then shoots up like 10 feet in the air, swinging and rolling and everything. But and I love slapstick comedy, to be honest, and it stretches the idea of an alien invasion in this one house really as far as it can go. And it'll have one of the funniest post-credit scenes you'll ever see. And now for a few examples of some so-so kids movies. One is called Snow Day, and ironically, this movie was released in 2000 and also starred Zena Grey and Josh Peck, who worked alongside each other a year later in Max Keeble's Big Move. So, and both movies are about the kids versus the adults. So Snow Day actually has a few different storylines. One teenager is trying to use an out-of-the-blue snow day to get a girl that he knows everything about. And then this teenager's little sister is after this evil snowplow man who always takes away their snow days and kills the legend of the second snow day. And the mom is trying her best to use the snow day as a chance to catch up on work, but her son just wants to play in the snow with her. And so there's quite a bit going on. And honestly, about the evil snowplow man part, which I was the most invested in, to tell you the truth, I'm not the biggest fan of salt on sidewalks. I don't know. It just I know that they're meant for safety. Just snow's beautiful, if you ask me. And these days I can see it as snowplow men. They don't do this to purposefully destroy kids' happiness. They do it so that the roads can get plowed and that they can go to school. However, this snowplow man, which is played by Chris Elliott, he intentionally destroys a snow fort. He cackles evilly, and we can see that he kind of enjoys getting his way, and even if that means little kids being angry at him. So we immediately root for the kids in this situation. That's what I mean by movies setting up to create a protagonist or antagonist. It doesn't really depend on the situation. It might depend on the character and their likability. So, and I found the twist, though, involving the big teenager, though predictable, kind of enjoyable. And there's a scene involving the mother and son that starts off kind of bad, but ends up great at the end. But actually, in the end, Snow Day is nothing really special. It is kind of forgettable and silly, but there are some parts that I think you'll enjoy. I think my least favorite one was the fact that the principal keeps getting plowed with snowballs, even though there's no real reason shown why he's being pelted with snowballs, just the fact that he's the principal. Then I'm going to be talking about a few more. The next one I'm going to be talking about are the two newest Despicable Me movies, Despicable Me 2 and Despicable Me 3. I mentioned how I don't really like these movies in my animation session, and I'm sorry if you like the Despicable Me movies. I actually really love the Minions spin-off, and I wish I liked these Despicable Me movies more. I felt like the second one's lowest turn point was its ability to be just a little too childish, and a little bit of the fact that there's not one but two of those slow motion romance scenes where one is gazing into the eyes of the other and imagining a future together. I'm not a big fan of those scenes. It seems like there's always going to be a fake out, and these people are just going to snap out of it eventually. But there's one involving one Minion and Gru's assistant Lucy. It didn't click with me as well. I felt like Gru was trying to push Margot away from this certain boy all the time, and it felt a little uncalled for by the end. And Despicable Me 3, I felt it was very messy, but it could have been a very good movie. I saw the animation on all of these movies is incredible. But I feel like it juggled way too many plot points. For instance, Gru's and Drew's attitude towards stealing and what to do with this certain jewel, and Agnes searching for a unicorn, and even Balthazar Brat. These all felt a little too cluttered up, and we didn't get a chance to really get as full of a story as I felt. So it wasn't really a surprise by the end when Dr. Nefario, played by Russell Brand, ends up frozen in ice for this movie. Just for this movie, I bet if there's going to be a fourth movie or a second Minions movie, but you get the idea. I felt like there was no place for him anyway. And the last movie I'm going to be talking about is The Cat in the Hat. And it's a really despised movie around here. It was released back in 2003, and after its release, Dr. Seuss's widow was convinced to not allow any more adaptations of her husband's works. I didn't know that at the time, and I still have The Cat in the Hat DVD. Basically, everyone knows what The Cat in the Hat looks like. This one is played by Mike Myers, and it focuses a lot on the two kids, Conrad and Sally, and come to think of it, I don't even think they have names in the book. This movie is mostly about how Conrad is just a big troublemaker, a rule breaker. He wants to have fun, but he doesn't care about keeping the house clean. He always does the opposite of what his mom says, and now he's at the risk of being sent to military school. And his sister is just a bit of a, you could say, control freak, or basically just doesn't know how to have fun. She's basically just as dry as a brick, as hard as brick. She always has a checklist of things to do, including make tomorrow's to-do list, research graduate schools, be spontaneous. But so when all of a sudden a humongous cat pops up, they scream, they run around the house until they eventually calm down, but they're still kind of freaked out about this cat, but he's basically there so that they can have fun. And his hat is pretty much magic. The reason that I think this was critically panned is because I mentioned how there's some vulgar humor in the Scooby-Doo movie, but it has nothing on The Cat in the Hat. There are references everywhere. I'm not even going to tell them on the show because they're that strange. But even though I want to talk about them, I'm not going to. It would be inappropriate. And you're thinking, inappropriateness in a kids movie based on a children's book? How weird is that? And I think the reason they did it was so that kids could laugh about how these characters were reacting funny, and adults could just shut their eyes and cringe or laugh along. But I still kind of to this day sort of like The Cat in the Hat. The set design is strange and amazing at the same time. The world is freaky. Everyone drives a yellow or lime green Toyota. Everything is jelly bean colored and strange looking. And the fish is well animated. Mike Myers looks great as the cat. He is very jolly, and the story ends up actually going pretty deep about brotherhood and sisterhood, about how they have to appreciate each other and how they learn to respect one another's differences. And I think that that's something that I wish more movies did. By the end, Sally says, "You're a pretty good brother," and it just you can see that I have a soft spot for The Cat in the Hat because of that. So those are all of the kids movies I'm going to be talking about today, and who knows, maybe one day I'll do a part 2 to this one, because there are some other movies I have in mind. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Weldon Witness, Bookworm, Film Geek, and Friend. And if you're a college student, then I hope you're happy to be back at school. And I wish you the best of luck for this extended semester. And I'll see you next week. And looking forward to it again. And once again, you can contact us on Twitter and Instagram at DCSI Riot Radio. I'm William McGinn. Thanks again for listening.